I want to talk about progress, not the president, because this is the president's shutdown.
Right.
He wanted the shutdown. He has not spoken at all about new technology, actually appropriate border security measures. He just talks about the nonsense wall that Sam Nunberg came up with, the build the wall, while he was on the campaign. Talk about Lindsey Graham and other Republicans who could actually be working with Democrats here and not standing with the president, because Mitch McConnell isn't talking. He's being pretty quiet.
Yeah, actually, I think that the most interesting thing about the meetings that we've had is the fact that Mitch McConnell doesn't say anything. Look, if there was a deal in the works, if there was real negotiation, Mitch McConnell would be there because he knows how to get this sort of thing done. You know, and you got to give credit to Lindsey Graham for at least trying to come up with a compromise, but it does strike me as a little bit naive. How many times do you have to have, Lucy take the football away before you realize that you're not going to be able to make a deal with somebody like Donald Trump, who is an unreliable negotiator. They've been down this path. And frankly, I don't think that Donald Trump wants a deal. I don't think Donald Trump wants a wall. I think he wants the fight. I think he wants the slogan. I think he wants to take it into 2020. And I think that right now, probably he's hoping that he can, get Republicans to look the other way when he declares a national emergency.
Then is that why Mitch McConnell, I mean, he did say we're unified, but he said nothing more than that.
Right.
He seems to be quietly slow playing this. Is that because if Democrats and Republicans work together and find a solution and then present it to the president, Mitch McConnell knows the president will block it. He'll be the obstructionist, and they don't want to set him up for that.
Sure, Stephen Miller will be, and again, you can come and present this to the president. He will say, yes, I agree to it. And then Stephen Miller will pick up the phone and call Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh, and the base will get riled up, and the president is completely prepared to renege.
So Ann Coulter calling the president a fraud and a weenie is what's stopping this, because that's what stopped it.
Stopped it last time.
Because I was just about to say, didn't all of this happen already?
Yeah, that's right.
Because they came to a deal, they sent it over.
There's a definition of insanity,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Then Eddie, don't Democrats need to remind us of that?
Yeah, indeed. I think they need to remind us of a couple of things. One is that at the heart of this whole thing is a lie. Everything.
Bingo.
Everything is a lie. So what does it mean to engage in good faith negotiations about a lie? That's nonsensical. And I want to agree with Charlie. I don't think he wants a victory. He wants to fight. And he wants to fight because the wall is a symbol of an ideology. It's the symbol of a particular kind of way of exploiting people's fears and anxieties about the changing nature of the country. Donald Trump doesn't give a damn, at least in my mind, about the substance of the argument, right? He doesn't see the points of contact between him, the Republican Party, and Democrats who are concerned about border security. And I think when he said to Leader Pelosi, right, if we open the government, will you give me my wall? I think in effect, Leader Pelosi said, boy, bye. He wants to say bye-bye. She said, boy, bye, because this is not sensible. At the end of the day, he wants us to spend $5 billion.
Okay, but you're asking for rational, sophisticated thought. Right. And what President Trump does is win the narrative. We watched him do it. Why wouldn't Democrats simply say, stop it? When they watch Mike Pence, I showed the clip earlier today, when they watch Mike Pence say, well, the Democrats won't listen to our border security priorities. Baloney. It's not border security priorities. What Nancy Pelosi is saying no to is a nonsense $5 billion wall that won't work. Yeah. Why won't Democrats clearly, aggressively stand up and say, stop with your nonsense wordsmithing? Because the success Mike Pence and Donald Trump have is around the country, people start to believe, well, the wall means security, and no wall means open borders, and that's a straight up lie.
Yes. And that's an important point, because they got to make it clear that they, in fact, are not for open borders. They are for border security, and that the wall, in fact, is ineffective. It's an obsolete boondoggle.
That's the point.
And there are all of the other issues involved here, including what the excessive cost. Conservatives used to mock wasteful spending, things like the bridge to nowhere, and the wall is basically the bridge to nowhere in immigration terms. They need to talk about things like, okay, how long is this actually going to take to build? How much private property will have to be seized from landowners? The words eminent domain need to be spoken a lot more here. And they also need to point out.
And whose land do you think that is going to be taken?
Yeah, this will not stop illegal immigration. This will not stop drug dealing. In fact, it will take resources away from legitimate immigration enforcement. And I think they need to talk about if, in fact, he invokes emergency powers and transfers money from the Defense Department to this wall, what legitimate defense operations are going to be starved. You know, is it housing? Is it schools? Is it hospital? Is it medical care for the men and women who are fighting for this country? They need to go right at those sorts of things. Because, again, the lie, of course, and we need to mention this every time, the lie was the big, beautiful wall would be paid for by Mexico. This is the original scam and con.
Think about all that's being starved because we had to pay for the corporate tax cuts.
Exactly.
Think about all of the money going to the private prisons. Think about all the money that was spent during zero tolerance policy, none of which are helping hardworking, forgotten Americans. Eddie, if the president moves forward with this, right? Axios pointed it out this morning. Since October, the middle of October, when the president started pushing on the caravan agenda, we have followed this car chase with him. All of the needs that aren't being tended to across the country that we've basically forgotten about. How much are we suffering because everything is about the southern border?
Well, I think tremendously. The country is in a crisis. I feel like we're in the midst of the decline of a civilization in some ways. And that
more teachers quit last year than any year. We could face a teacher strike in California on Monday.
Second largest district in the country, right? But look at this. When we take it, we know that there are push-pull factors. We know that what's happening in Central America in terms of the violence, they're pushing folks here. We understand that the humanitarian crisis that Donald Trump is alluding to is in part his own making, of his policies have generated. We understand in some significant way, right, that if he decides to declare a national emergency, we are at the constitutional crisis. So I want to just be very clear here. We're talking about the politics, right? We're talking about the politics. That's something important. But if Donald Trump decides to declare a national emergency on the basis of a lie, and we allow him to do it, then we are basically signing off on the fact that we have an autocrat in power. So the implications of this are serious. They cut to the heart of who we are, right? And so as a democracy, so we need to understand this beyond the simple fact that he's diverting attention. It's not a simple fact because it's real, because there are real lives being lost, real problems not being solved. But at the heart of who do we take ourselves to be as a democracy is being challenged directly by this decision.
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, Donald Trump has dumbed down the immigration debate. He's dumbed down our political discourse. This is a great country, a huge country, a lot of things going on, and we are focused on this one issue. But I agree with Eddie on this. If he in fact goes for the emergency, the declaration of an emergency, and Republicans go along with it because they think this is their win-win scenario, this is their off-ramp, they will have created a really, really dangerous precedent. And conservative Republicans ought to be really alarmed after generations of warning about government overreach. Suddenly now they have bought into sort of the authoritarian rule by fiat. It will be an extraordinary moment, and you have to think about how many steps did it take for the Republican Party to get to this moment where they think that is their best option with this president.
800,000 people aren't going to get a paycheck tomorrow. There is no win-win scenario when some parents can't go to the grocery store on Saturday.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.